RFP, some of the information didn't show up till late, but definitely in the future, you should be seeing this information earlier.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any other comments? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes as written?
So moved, Frank Penn.
Second.
All in favor, if you would raise your hand. And any opposed? The motion passes unanimously.
So Craig, would you like to take over now with the RFP update for us, please, sir?
Sure, I have just a brief update before we get to the next item, which is introduction of the selected consultant or the top ranked consultant. So I will go ahead and share my screen now, hopefully. I'm getting some issues with sharing the screen here. Bear with me. It's giving me, and Hal, you may have seen this before. It's giving me options for, oh, here we go. I just needed to ask the question and then it would start working. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so in your packets today, you'll notice that behind the minutes, you have a copy of the RFP ad that went out that was revised per your comments at the last meeting. And we also have an abbreviated version of the top ranked RFP response in there for your review. So as you know, we met in June to discuss the RFP language and make some minor changes to that before it was advertised. It was advertised on June 29th with those changes. We also included the $150,000 budget that we had discussed. The deadline for response to the RFP was July 27th, and we had our selection committee meeting just about a week ago on the 13th. So we received 6 responses, which is pretty good. The first time around, when we advertised the first time, we received 5 responses, so it's actually up from that. All of the responses were right in the $149,000 to $150,000 range. There was only about a $700 variance between all 6 of those responses. And long story short, Stantec was ranked first by the selection committee. They had a very strong project approach. They demonstrated a solid understanding of the scope, and moreover, they showed throughout their proposal or their response, and you'll see this in the pages that are in your packet as well, that they have the ability to visually depict data to help facilitate some of the discussions that both this task force as well as some of the public meetings will need to make decisions. So this is actually a snapshot of the project timeline that Stantec provided to us in their response, and I thought it was a good visual depiction of what we're looking at here for the next 9 months. And that's the good news, is that they are proposing to complete the project in 9 months. I know the task force was interested in trying to get this done in well sooner than a year. So they are proposing all of the tasks within the RFP be completed within that 9-month time frame. These tasks mirror exactly what you saw in the RFP ad, so I won't read those to you again, but I do want to just mention that for task 3, which is the redevelopment and land use scenarios that will be developed, the consultant has an interesting approach to that that I think will be pretty effective. The first scenario they're putting together will incorporate infill goals. The second scenario that they're anticipating will use growth trends and other assessments and put together a second potential growth map there. And those 2 will be presented to the public, as well as, of course, this task force to receive feedback and input on that. And the input will go into a 3rd scenario. So rather than doing I think when we wrote the RFP, we were anticipating taking 3 scenarios to the public. They had a good idea with putting 2 together and getting some input, and then letting that inform a 3rd scenario that would come back for final adoption. And finally, the next immediate steps following this meeting today, we're working on a purchase of service agreement with Stantec right now. That will go to council for approval. So that's an important thing to note. Although the committee has ranked Stantec first, it still needs to go through the council approval process. And our project kickoff will be immediately after council approval. We're hoping to get that done as early in September as possible. So Stantec was gracious enough to attend the meeting today, even though we are not under formal contract yet. They are led by Mark Butler, who has an AICP. He has a planning background, and he brought a few team members with him that he will be introducing as your next agenda item. That's all I have today, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you have.
Well,
Okay,
is it, oh, go
with-
ahead.
with-
Excuse me.
With that being said, would Mark like to, there you are, good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Mark.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I am Mark Butler. I am a senior planner and transportation planner for Stantec in the Lexington office. I've been here for about 5 years in Lexington, and before that I was with Stantec in Louisville for about 5 years. And before that I worked for a Cordino Group. So I've been in Kentucky almost 20 years now. And as Craig mentioned, I went to school for urban planning and land use comprehensive planning at Florida State, where we do a lot of urban growth boundary kind of work. And that's how I got started. And since I've been up here, I've been mainly doing the transportation work, but we do, transportation and infrastructure is clearly a big part of all urban growth, and we think about planning all the time. So when we had this opportunity, I love living in Lexington, and the opportunity to work here has been something I'm really looking forward to. And luckily we were able to have a very strong team, including John Bucher, who works for Stantec in Louisville, and he does mitigation and resiliency planning, and has a strong background in land use planning. And he's going to be my right hand. We're going to kind of tag team this to try to meet a pretty tight, aggressive time frame, a schedule. And we've assembled a team that we believe can do this in a way that meets this budget and provides to what we believe is the real goal of this project, which is to create, whether you want to call it a system or a framework or a playbook, for how to run the policy to make the decisions, but let you guys make the decisions, let the Planning Commission make the decisions. So our approach is to, at first, develop our baseline, go through the process of understanding current and past policy. We have a team, Cynthia Albright is another Stantec planner. She has a lot of experience working on urban boundaries and urban growth boundaries type studies throughout the country. And she's going to be our subject matter expert, try to keep us all on the same page as far as internally, as we work through the elements of the plan that we need to put together. And then Ed Holmes, who is a former Planning Commission member and very well recognized within the Lexington planning community for a lot of the projects he's working on. He's going to be our public engagement lead. This is, of course, something that we need to have a very transparent and consistent voice, someone that can provide the kind of base understanding of how we communicate well, and he's the person that we'll work closely with, because he knows not only all of you guys and all the other players in Lexington, but he also understands what we're trying to do very well. So EHI will be on our team for that, and MXD is a consultant out of Vancouver, and they specialize in the types of development growth analyses that we are at the basis of the kind of comprehensive planning that we're considering here. And one of the differences between our proposal now and what it was back in December is that we've taken off to a higher level, and we're going to be looking at this more of a macro level instead of being as explicit about particular scenarios or lines on a map or exact parcel inventories. We're talking about larger trends and land use types, and understanding how the current economic market conditions are now and the general winds in which we're going moving forward, so that our baseline is educated in that regard. And then as far as what we believe is the mechanism for delivering the policy, we have teamed with a group out of Asheville, North Carolina called Urban 3. And if you can see in your packet, you can see some of their visualizations in there. And what they do really well is to create these thematic 3D renderings of productivity, land productivity, the liabilities and the revenues that come from the land uses that community has. And we found everybody that's seen one of their presentations immediately light up, because they make it make sense very easily. How much particular land uses choices cost and how much they recoup, the municipalities recoup. And it's that type of simplicity of coming to a simple idea of how to convey this information that we believe will really help make the policy transparent. And our goal is not to make the decisions, it's simply to help provide this tool. And one of the ways we feel like between December and this spring, when this project was re-advertised, is we've had to really go back to the basics of understanding that it's about developing the framework. It's about developing a repeatable, reliable process that the Planning Commission can, and the city and city planners can implement whenever they choose to make a decision with the current data that's available, as opposed to us today deciding what's needed in 20 years. We want to make sure that there's a process that lets new information come into it and that everybody understands that's how it's going to work. And one of the things that we have experience with in that regard is Stantec's role with the capacity assurance program with the consent decree. In that case, we had people from different, different sides of the table, so to speak, different interests, and they had different interests, but Stantec was able to help coordinate a process that was transparent and easy to agree on consensus of how the process worked. And so that's good that we have that in-house, that we have the folks that work on the capacity assurance program right down the hall from us if I ever get back to the office. And but also that we have their knowledge on what these infrastructure items cost. So it's not, we're walking into it with an ability to be able to come up with unit costs for various types of infrastructure items that we can put into our baseline as well. Again, as Craig mentioned, our approach is to spend the first 3 to 4 months developing our baseline analysis and then feeding that into the folks at Urban 3 to develop their scenarios. And again, our first 2 scenarios are basically I like to work with bandwidths. I like to say that there's a low and a high, and something's going to happen in the middle. And so our bandwidths here are the infill development strategies that were in the comp plan. That would mean a more efficient use of land than you might see if there wasn't a growth boundary here. And then the second scenario would be a more conventional land development program that you might see if and more with more conventional peripheral land development. Urban 3 can take that and then develop these maps that show the benefits and the liabilities and the revenues of those different approaches, and we can talk about what goes into it and what we like about what goes into it, what we change about it. And the goal is to try to create something simple enough that we can repeat it, maybe not with all the panache of their expertise, but something that we know how it works and how we can use it again and again as an approach to evaluating new proposals and new ideas for when those decisions come about. And so with those two scenarios, we can then go back and say, with whatever adjustments, comments, ideas, and run a third scenario. And so that's the plan. And if we, and we will, of course, our approach is to document how we do everything for the purposes of understanding that this is supposed to be the framework and approach going forward. So in that regard, we desperately, or not desperately, but we definitely want to work very closely and collaboratively with the planning staff and the task force, because we will, not only do we need their support to get all of this done, it's a heavy lift, but we also want to make sure that there's nothing that isn't well understood and well agreed to as being an implementable framework going forward. And so we will have, as we go forward and we assemble the data that we're assembling, we'll keep track of where we got it, how we would get it again. We keep track of how we, how we catalog it. And ultimately, there is that optional task where we can do something similar to what we do with the capital assurance program, where we run our own system for maintaining and letting various actors work with the data, develop and add to the data as well. And of course, that's something we can decide as we move forward. So that's all I have for right now. Just again to say, I appreciate the opportunity. It is very exciting for me personally. I am a land use planner at heart, and it's great to work here in Lexington to do this. And so I'm looking forward to it. And if you guys have any questions or anything you wanted to comment now, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts.
Thank you,
Hey,
Mark.
Mark. Oh, go ahead, Craig.
No, I was going to say thank you, Mark. Shall we open the floor to questions and comments to the group, from the group?
I had a comment if I could. Mark, it's very important to, I think, the whole team that we have here. When the mayor approached me many months ago about serving on this, she said, Ann, we've got to fix this issue that we have out there, that we come together every 5 years and we fight on how we're going to grow and where we're going to grow. And I said, I am with you. I want to solve this. This has been horrible every 5 years that, we do this. So it's not a matter of us growing. It's a matter of how we go and putting a time frame to the key indicators that will tell us, okay, we're out of land. We need to go in this direction or that direction. But we need those key indicators to tell us when and where we're going to go. But more important, we got to look at the when, because we're all sick and tired of this 5-year, battle that we do, and it's just no fun for anybody. So that's the main reason that I'm on here, because I want a time frame that, and I want to know if we need to come back and visit this every year, every 2 years, if we need to do it, or is it going to be set up that these key indicators are going to kick off, and when they kick off, then we, that's our time to do it. So I just need understanding on that. But I wanted to emphasize to you guys the importance of a time frame for our growth. That's very important to me.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, because I do think that is something that is delicate enough where we don't want to what we don't want to do is put out a series of dates and locations and lines on maps. But
No.
to the degree that we can establish in the framework how often, to your point, we revisit these key indicators, the criteria, how we're doing against them, and what the the method is for analyzing not only a particular section of the economy, but the whole economy or the whole region as a whole, in any particular new developments in the past year. I think that's will be a big part of the framework we develop, is the implementation strategy for doing that kind of analysis going forward. And I suspect that this will be our prototype run of how that happens. So we will likely come forward with recommendations based on our analysis now, but we're also want to make sure that the framework meets your concerns about having a system when a threshold is met, or
Right.
every certain period of time we do the analysis so that we can see where we are going forward. Yeah, I appreciate your comment, and we'll definitely take that into advisement for one of the critical elements of whatever framework we come up with.
If I can add to that real briefly, when Mark and I discussed the scope of the work earlier this week, one of the important things we talked about was the ability for staff to be able to make future updates to the data and to the system that they ultimately put into place. So that's something that we're working on as well as we go through this process, to ensure that this can be both implemented and updated on a regular basis by staff.
Good. That's great.
Can I jump in, Ann, if I can, kind of to follow up on that, the whole question of timeframes. A part of what I've expressed before, and I want to express it again, is my concern that this not be something that has such a short horizon, that it doesn't recognize one important fact, and that is that eventually there will be no more rural land to develop. That is, at a certain point, there'll be no place to go. It'll either be developed or it'll be protected, and we will be in a position of having only infill. So I'm curious about your thinking about how you factor that in, and also how you factor in the impact on the capacity of rural land as an economic engine.
Well, I'll be honest. I haven't explicitly considered the way we look at infill is that we definitely want to take advantage of the available land we have before we move forward outside the land, outside the boundary. We want to have a really good inventory of what that is, and understand that, to your point, that the last thing you can do with rural agricultural land is develop it, and then it's developed. And I think the folks that we're going to be working with, that is like Cynthia Albright and John, that understanding of the rural and the urban land use connection is a critical aspect of the land use planning basis for where we're going forward. And I really think that we need to get as much input from the task force and from the other community groups to determine how we establish the weight we place on those items. I don't really want to prejudice it right this moment, but I definitely appreciate what you're saying. I mean, I think that we only get one opportunity to develop rural agricultural land, and we want to make sure it's done in a thoughtful manner, and that's why we're going through this process.
I would just add that that's one of the benefits of the system that Urban 3 brings to our team, is that each time we do that evaluation gives you the opportunity to see those consequences and what they mean, and potentially what they mean, long term as well as short term. So, and it's a visual thing that's easy to understand, which is kind of the beauty of what they do, is putting that into an easily understood visual, as opposed to a long drawn out report that may be hard to understand. So I think that's really important, is that the looking at the consequences versus the rewards of developing parts of the rural service area.
I did have a question, if you don't mind. I And I know you talked about, we were always looking at arguing about how we grow and where we grow. And I think one of the things that seems to be missing from the RFP, and maybe it's in there more, subtext, but I want to understand how you guys plan to address who benefits from this growth, who's included in that growth. I know that the last time we argued about the urban growth boundary, there was a lot of discussion about how not expanding really hurt affordable housing and that there wasn't an equitable access to rural areas. So just thinking about how, Mark, I know you said that John has some expertise in resilience, just thinking about how both the environment and equity factor into your approach. You could talk a little bit about that.
Well, who was that directed toward, me or who?
It was directed toward Mark and John.
Okay.
I was just
Right.
playing off of what you said.
Well, I think that's part of part of MXD's role will be to help us understand the market economics and how they affect the different community, different members of the community. I think Ed Holmes is a planner. That's part of his role as well, is to try to keep his experience working with and getting input from the community back into our analysis. And then that's what we do feed back into the models that Urban 3 is going to develop. I think, housing costs and the other aspects of municipal revenue and other cost of living effects of development will be a part of those models, and certainly a part of like the criteria we're developing that we would be using to go forward. But yes, I mean, as we're dealing with infill, that is, affordable housing and the urban service growth boundary is a big part of that. That's definitely one of the major categories of criteria that will be addressed with whatever framework we come up with. And John,
Okay.
did you?
I just had, looking at your presentation about how you're going to look at historical trends and market analysis, thinking about as a broader concept, like if we're just expanding what Lexington has been, or if this is an opportunity to really infuse that process with some other value sets. And I don't, I might be Craig or others, you can tell me if I'm way out of bounds or if that's way beyond the scope of this group, but it seems like this is an opportunity to really put a framework to that.
And I think that's one of the first things we want to do is actually have a project kickoff where we talk about each the general baskets of criteria and metrics that we want to think about and get everybody's opinion and try to, as best we can, come up with a consensus of what we should be looking at. I don't want to say exactly what they should be. I want everybody to agree on them. I do think that I am very much intrigued by the US 27 study. That study is going on with another consultant to think about densification on that corridor for making it more transit friendly. The approaches they have will, I think, I would like to see what they've come up with and what their experience has been. But I think that's the thing that MXD and even Urban 3, they do this all around the country. They're doing this because they recognize the need on the civic level for addressing problems related to conventional land use development and what that means to the city, and not just their bottom line revenue side, but also for the markets within the city, whether it's for affordable housing or for commercial development or for rural land for that matter. And so we will be relying a lot on that expertise, John and Cynthia Albright, that those will be aspects that we will definitely take in consideration, because I do believe they are what makes Lexington special now, but they have their own set of inherent problems, affordable housing being one of them.
I think the other thing to keep in mind there is that really our comp plan should be incorporating those values, those
Right.
community-wide values as we have those discussions. And really this study is I mean, at the end of the day, this is an implementation of those values through putting metrics in place. So those conversations will continue as part of the comp plan, but this is going to be reflective of that in some respects. I expect some of those same discussions will be had as we move forward.
May I piggyback on that statement from Craig? And, you know, when I read the proposal, I'm trying to understand how it's different than a comp plan, I guess, and how the deliverables, it seemed like we were wanting to get to a point of having some objective criteria as opposed to qualitative criteria. And so I'm just trying to understand the delineation between the comp plan process and then the results of this project. And then I guess the follow-on question that would be one of the deliverables in task 5 as making recommendations for near-term regulatory changes and projects to facilitate expansion of the boundary. Are we going to consider spot redevelopment zone changes for that, or how does that work? So anyway, I'm sorry to bounce around, but those would be my questions. Sorry to interrupt, Mayor Gordon.
Well, I mean, I do think that the main difference between a comprehensive plan and what we're trying to do is we're focused on the criteria that would be directly related to how you would make decisions about the boundary, and those criteria will be informed by what the values and the consensus that we build with the task force, with you, and with the public stakeholder groups, and those are the basis for what we end up with our recommendations. Again, we may have specific recommendations this time, but those won't really be our recommendations. They'll be the recommendations of the folks from the planning department and folks from the task force as we've gone through this process. But we are actually trying to really just document a process and make it repeatable and effective to use again, and get people to be familiar with it and comfortable with it and understand how it works, as opposed to a comp plan that's like looking at a more policy level basis. I think we're here trying to create more of a implementation framework, like a set of criteria and a set of explicit steps that would be taken every time a decision was on the table.
And Mark, will that be based on objective data? That's what we need.
Do you want me to? I'll take that one, Mark. You've been going a long time. So that's going to be one of the challenges when you start to put in the the priorities and the goals of the comp plan, as well as the Sustainable Growth Task Force, is finding data sources that are regular, consistent, easy to find, easy to use, that are truly objective, that you can then fit into the model. And you may find that some of the criteria that we come up with as a group from both the comp plan, from the market trends, and from other sources, that it's very difficult to find data for that. And that's going to be a conversation that we're going to have as we go through the project, is how can we effectively include this criteria item if we can't find what we think are good, reliable data sources to include in that tool, that then you would use on multiple iterations to make those decisions. We don't envision making specific parcel level recommendations, but you could use the tool to do that should you choose to do that at some point in time. It would have the ability to do that, but that is not what we have been tasked with doing, thankfully. I don't think anybody on our team wants to be the one choosing which parcels are slated for what.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about objective data on putting that in place on when we grow, on when we're out of land, when we have to go outside the boundary. That's what I'm talking about. Not where, but when.
Right. And that's part of the challenge we'll have through the process, is as we set those criteria, determining the appropriate data sources that are objective and that are defensible when you put them into that model. So It's hard to answer that right now until we develop that list of criteria. But that's going to be important for us to know are these data sources appropriate for what we want to use them
Right,
for? And
right.
can we find them easily in 2 years or 1 year or 5 years when it's time for you to do this again? Because if we can't continue to create new data, do new surveys, do new whatever every time, we have to find the places where we can access that data and use it.
And this is Frank Finn. Let me jump in here. You okay?
Yep.
This is the first time that we've had a chance to talk directly to the consultants. And so I may be repeating myself to a few of you all that have heard me say this before. But the objective data is so important because at the end of the day, I want Dennis Anderson and I to agree on the numbers.
Right.
It doesn't make any difference whether we agree on whether we need to expand or we don't need to expand. We need to understand that these are the numbers and that they're not being tilted or jilted or used one way or the other to support one side or the other. And if we can't leave here at the end of this task force and have a place and have a computer program installed that will tell us on a monthly or yearly basis how much available land we have, what kind of use it is, whether it's underdeveloped or whether it's developed, then all we're doing is spinning our wheels. So we know the values. We don't have to go back and reestablish the values. We just went through a long process of comp plan that established the values. What we need to decide is how do we interpret this, the availability of land, and how do we, going forward, have the metrics to say we're out of this and we need to expand it. And then the rest of the questions will fall in line. And as a current planning commission member at this time, if we cannot get the planning staff to be able to put those numbers together and have the tools to do it, then a lot of this becomes philosophical. Thank you, man.
Mayor Gordon, I believe you would raise your hand.
Thank you for allowing me a couple questions. And they, I think they probably have to do with your section on existing conditions and growth trends evaluation. And I wanted to go back to the Vice Mayor's point. Governor Beshear has recently appointed his Agritech Council, on which I am serving. And he has made it very clear for the entire state of Kentucky that he's targeting agriculture and local food production for as a growth industry to ramp up big time all over the state. And I wondered if you have considered how do you factor something like that in into your assessment?
Well, okay, go ahead, John.
Okay, so that actually should be something that I think we can incorporate because there are data sources that will assign values to the land based on the land use and what's being produced, and so it would vary depending on what's being produced on that land. But there are data sources that we can use for that particular item, and obviously apply that to the areas in the rural service area. That I guess what we'll need to find out is how do we quantify things like the horse industry in Kentucky versus a national value that's given for the how much those type farms and that type of land use is worth, because it's obviously very different in Fayette County how those would be valued as opposed to other parts of the country. So we may be having to make adjustments to those based on the location, but we definitely have sources for values of other types of agricultural production.
So I guess your thinking is you'd have a way to, this council's just getting up and running, and it will be looking at a number of increased production and technology related to agriculture. So I think the trick will be how to figure out what's going to happen in the future. You address one of your items as growth trends evaluations. So I'm guessing you would be taking something like that into consideration, looking at what they're doing and where they're going with it. Is that what
Well, I
you're
think the
saying?
original intent of the growth trend analysis was to do more of a market level analysis that focuses on what happens, what is happening in Lexington, what is happening regionally,
Okay.
what is happening nationally, and
Mhm.
just giving us the contours of the economic trends going forward, so that we know like what a city that's of a typical size that has this typical kind of industries in this particular part of the country, what we would expect the rates of new development would normally be. So that we have, again, some basis. But I think your question gets back to how do we have a framework that's flexible enough to take into account new initiatives, new programs, and I think that, to me, is what this is really about. I don't really want to be the target of like, why did you pick this number? Why did you decide on this value? What I want it to be so obvious that we all did it. And that we all came to the conclusions of why we got to the metrics and the thresholds we have now. And then what I would like you to hold me accountable for is this is great, but how can we make changes to this? Like when we need to make changes to this, how do we make adjustments when a new condition or situation that we weren't thinking about in 2020 came about. So we want to create a framework that shows these are the imports we used here, this is where we got them, this is how we could adjust them, and while we went through this process, these are the several areas of complexity or conflict that we had to address, and this is how we got through that, and this is how we could move forward again. But I think your point is like, it is, honestly, we need to have an ability to say these are the mechanisms for changing the framework to incorporate a new idea.
Well, you queued up my second question beautifully, and I promise we didn't talk beforehand. COVID-19 impact. So
Yes.
I have, as all of us have, been keeping up with national news on this front, and of course local. And many businesses are saying that what they realize is they love the telecommuting. And so they don't need as much space in their office buildings because they're going to have employees working from home for a long time. You saw what Google did. I think they're all working from home till next summer. And so how do I think there's going to be a big change in the need for commercial space, office space, and that sort of thing. So how do you build that into your study of what is actually needed?
I think the process of talking about it and like talking with subject matter experts, people that are used to like following larger economic trends, but also just having people that can think about resiliency, not in just the natural definition of the word of like natural disasters or stuff, but just like how cities evolve based on changing conditions. And the COVID-19 pandemic, this current environment, will have some very long-term effects, I think, beyond just our physical health. And so I don't know exactly how to figure that in quite yet, but we definitely know that that's the point of this framework, is that it has to be capable of adapting to those unforeseen changes, and but to do it in a way that it's not just a power dynamic that how it changes. It changes because we have a process for introducing new information and putting it into the system for deliberation. And just basically, I think that's the point. It's just to have that kind of basic roadmap of, well, we know we don't want to do it, and we don't want to no holds barred fight about it. We're going to get through this because we agree that growth will occur, And so we're going to go through these deliberative steps. This is the way we did it before when we spent a lot more time on it. And now we've gotten a little bit more comfortable with it. We can maybe move a little bit more quickly because we've got some experience and we've got some, we've got some stuff already stored up in our database.
And I'll add that specifically, Mayor, there's one really big component of that we're going to rely on Jim and House staff for, is that vacant and underutilized land inventory. And so that part of the scope of this project, and obviously going forward, will rely on their staff to compile that data. But that is going to be something that is very important in recognizing just exactly what you're talking about in terms of what percentage of commercial space is vacant, and how much of that do we see in the next 5 years being returned to commercial space, or how much of that do we think would be better served as residential. And so constantly updating that vacant and underutilized land database that they have is key to those types of decisions, and really what a lot of what the model is built on is that data.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
I think Vice Mayor has something to say.
Thank you. Actually, the mayor, in her follow-up question, went where I wanted to go, but I would just add, I think there's a big question about trends and relying on trends at this point, given the upheaval we've seen. And this is my favorite example, so I'll just share it. But when the council and the mayor in February were looking at possibilities of expanding revenue, one of the options was to try and get the restaurant tax as an option for Lexington. And the thinking at that time was, that's the most reliable tax we've got. If we could get that, everything's going to be fine. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
So and one other comment, I think, and that is, we've talked in this community a fair amount about food security and the local food economy. COVID emphasizes the importance of that. It creates opportunities. We're really at the beginning edge of all of that. So I just think there's some data that historically we don't have. There aren't any trends there that we can look at. It's kind of a new ballgame. So, and I make that comment. I assume everybody's aware of that, but I think it's worth mentioning, and especially for people who are not from Fayette County and who maybe are not as aware of the way in which we're working on the local food economy. Thank you.
I also think Lewis Johnson has something to say. Go ahead, Mark, and we can have Lewis come up next.
No, I was just wanting to express that I agree with that. When we had done this, built together this team back in December, we weren't thinking of COVID. We certainly, every meeting that I'm in, when we're talking about the work we do with KYTC about planning, it is interesting to see this, it slowly dawn on people that we're not going to be able to do traffic counts next month, and in fact, we're going to get to the point where we can't pretend that the trend line is something that just reverts back to the mean because of all the things that we're talking about. And so it's a new experience for all of us, and it certainly is for me. But I think to your point, I think we all get it. The folks that are doing the economic analysis, I'm interested in what they have gleaned so far, how they would approach the issues. But no, I mean, I have a certain level of respect / disdain for all these large scale trend lines that we use for a lot of the planning work that we do in transportation. They need to be more local. They need to be more attuned to like the realities of the moments we're in. And again, I think that's why we just need to create something we bear in mind how we create something that's flexible but repeatable. And that would take into account the specifics of what's going on here in Fayette County, but also the specifics of what's happening today and how that will affect us over the next 20 years.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. I think one thing I really wanted to harp on was the word flexibility. I think it's a really important word because I think we're hearing two things about we would need really specific and objective data. It's something that's very hard and concrete that we can always keep coming back to, which is very important. Things like sewer capacities and other things, you know, those are very important data sets. But I had an example that came up with me in my professional life this week that I think why the word flexibility is so important here is you also don't want to lock yourself into a tool that doesn't allow for innovation or creative decision making based on changes. And the example is we're working on a park master plan in a city that will remain nameless. And I was having a conversation with the public works employees, and it was 2-lane, you know, 2-directional streets, really small neighborhood streets. A young person had died because a car was speeding through and killed a young girl next to the park. There was a history of wrecks, but the public works people, because they were following the tool explicitly, said that the traffic volume was actually too little to put stop signs in at the corners, which is like, for normal human beings, a completely befuddling, mind-boggling situation to be in, right? And so I think that's an exaggerated and a really kind of small, fine-grained example of a tool that was so concrete and so inflexible that it's actually working against community values. And so I think we got to keep that in mind. And that's a huge challenge here because the intersectionality for this planning effort, everything's related here. Like everything is related to growth. We're talking about equity, environment, economics, all of that stuff. So that's an enormous challenge, especially given the timeline. And I think just my last kind of point was just about transparency, especially in the moment that we are in today. And I think to Chris's point about who benefits from growth and really kind of focusing on our minority and Black communities and how this really is going to impact them and how it has impacted them in the past. And we're going to fly through this process. And with COVID, everything is harder now for how we talk to the communities and make sure we're communicating. So I think that's something that is going to take some very serious commitment from everybody's part on this through the consultant team and in the city to make sure that we do that the right way and to the best of our abilities. Thanks.
Don?
I think he's muted.
How's that?
That's
There you
much
go.
better. Thank you.
Okay, it says, my screen says I'm muted, but anyway, as long as you all can hear me. John, I just want to speak to your point. You beat a couple of rounds ago. You did, thank you, speak of the considerable vacant and underutilized land within the urban service boundary. I mean, there's some, my understanding, some 16, 17,000 acres. So I know in former expansions, I'm an ex-planning commission member from a number of cycles ago, to Christopher and Lewis's points about affordable housing. That's often been, we need to expand for affordable housing. We've never built it in an expansion area or very minimally. So affordable housing is much more of a robust, multi-agency deal to do, and we must do it. But I'm just, I don't want to jump the track. I really think we really need to work on that 17,000 acres that we've got to find those spots in all the way the world has changed. We have a great opportunity. To me, I think if we do some major expansion, it might represent a failure at planning in the community. So it's a great community. I think we've done land use really intelligently, certainly very intensely, and it's been a hard effort. But thank you for bringing up, because I think that's really that's our task. Thank you.
I think of everybody on here, the ones that said it the best was Frank Penn saying that he wants to be in the same room with Dennis Anderson and agree on the land that we have to do. So I think we've got to have that objective data that will bring us all to that point, and then we can decide on where to grow.
Any other comments from the task force members? Oh, Richard? Richard, did you raise your hand or were you frozen?
I raised my hand, but I'm having a problem freezing. So if it's freezing up, I apologize at this moment. I just wanted to piggyback on what Ann and Frank said as it relates to objective data. Hopefully we'll have some of that will guide us through this process. I know the issue of affordable housing is front row in a lot of conversations. And I think we have room to do that. And so I'm just looking forward to, again, what we will have. Course, that's objective data that can help us drive this.
Richard, you froze up for a minute, but I think you were stating how important objective data is, something that everyone can agree is correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Any other comment from the task force members? Do we have any public comment that anybody involved in this, can we tell?
Sir, I'll ask if anybody from the public has any public comment they would like to add to this, please raise your hand digitally and we'll bring you in for public comment. Sir, we do have a phone number as well. Would you like me to ask if they would like to speak at this time?
Yes, please.
Individual with the phone number 859-321-5643. If you'd like to unmute yourself and provide public comment at this time, you can do so. Chairs, I do not see any comment coming from that individual at this time.
Okay, we'll move on. Thank you very much. Without further comment, I believe we are in a position to adjourn the meeting. I would like to inquire about the next meeting. I haven't looked at my calendar, but Craig, do you offhand know when that meeting date is, or do we have it established?
I can look that up real quick. Hold on 1 second, please.
And I want to thank everybody from Stantec on getting on here with us and chatting. I think this has been very helpful.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for
Hopefully it's
having
been
us.
helpful to you guys to kind of hear where we're coming from.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So the task force typically meets on the third Wednesday of each month at 3 p.m. So that would place your next meeting on the 16th of September at 3 p.m., presumably via Zoom as well.
If everyone would please note that, that would be great. With no further comment then, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move adjourned.
So moved.
Let's adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your
Thank you.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.